Welcome to our Urban Legends podcast. I'm Dr. Gloria McDaniel Hall. I've been a teacher, a principal, and assistant superintendent, all within urban schools in Chicago and around the country. Our Urban Legends podcast is a forum for sharing ideas, strategizing together, and supporting each other as we dismantle the deficit narratives sometimes associated with urban education and discuss where and how amazing work is being done. So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode where I am featuring who I'm calling urban legends, those people who are changing the narrative, those people who are making the impossible possible. And I'm just so excited that I have these two people, one who I met recently when he defended his dissertation, and I was on his committee, and the other, Miss Toi Smith, who was a teacher at the school where I was first principal and she was a first year teacher. And that was 1999. So we just figured out we've known each other for 23 years. I'm excited about this conversation tonight because research has proven that the most important variable in any school or classroom success is the effectiveness of its teachers. And what I can't wait to discuss with Toi is her evolution from a first year teacher into the person who was the case study for Dr. Tre Childress's dissertation. I didn't even know it when I was reading it. I didn't know until she showed up at the dissertation hearing, but this is going to be amazing.
He don't make no mistakes.
He
don't make no mistakes.
No mistakes.
No, he doesn't.
No mistakes. And you might not be able to figure out why you met a person when you first met them, but I'm also thinking like, okay, this is year 38 for me. It might be time to retire because it's just coming full circle. Like so many people who I've known are coming back into my life and they've all like prospered and done such amazing things. So Toi, let's start with you. Just do an intro and tell us a little bit about your journey in education, in urban education specifically.
Yeah, Toi Smith, I was a former classroom teacher and math coach. Right now I am coaching teachers and doing a little curriculum writing. Started off, got my degree in biology really early in 1991. So I had not planned on being an educator, was launched into education because I couldn't find a job. And so from there, applied to different schools. I started off teaching in a Christian school. And I feel like you were the very first one that gave me the opportunity to work in urban education in Chicago public schools. So thank you for that. But no, just really kind of immerse myself in the classroom, in the learning and professional development. And open myself up to this world of mathematics. I thought I was always pretty good in math, but realized that as I got exposure and attended professional development and math changed, like I said, I just really immersed myself in it, fell in love with it, and this is where I've ended up. And so, I love kids, just passionate about kids and them learning mathematics and understanding math. And so this is where I am today. And so I'm excited. And like I said, I told a teacher, a principal, just had a conversation with a principal. If I could walk into classrooms, go into buildings and teach math all day long and leave, if I could actually do that, I would do that because that's just how much I love.
Take me with you because I would do the same thing. Middle school math is it.
Right. And just engage kids and, activate their thinking and be like, oh, I'm done. I would do it all day long.
Nice.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay, Dr. Tre.
All right. Dr. Hall, thank you very much for having me. I'm so happy to be in the presence of such esteemed, wonderful educators, and I'm just really thankful for the invitation. Just a little bit about me. I am the product of two parents who went to HBCUs, whose son eventually went to HBCUs. I don't really feel like there was much of a choice. It was a choice, but
Not a lot.
I mean, I feel like when you think about education, it's really, I think successful spaces are more like Cheers. If you remember the old school Cheers, Norm would come through and everybody would yell Norm, right? And even in the theme of Cheers, we're really happy that you're here. We're always glad you came. And I feel like that I wanted my experiences to feel a whole lot like the experiences that I had as a learner at HBCUs. I wanted to feel that when I was a classroom teacher. So much like the esteemed Toi Smith, I had the opportunity to become a biology major, a minored in chemistry, thought I was going to be working on the Ebola virus, and it was working for the CDC, and that was just where I was going to go. And I actually fell in love with teaching through tutoring. I was tutoring in New Orleans at Xavier University of Louisiana, and it was actually the best part of my week. And I didn't think it was. I thought it was just going to be, just something that I did, accumulate some community service hours. And I just was unreasonably happy to help little, just kids with their homework, especially math homework. I was like, oh man, this is just dope. I'm really geeked about it, and legitimately just parlayed that into, hey, Teach for America. Y'all need anybody? And so I was, kind of parlaying kind of two different things of going the science route versus the education route. And I said, well, I can do the education route for a couple of years, put the science thing off, and then I'll go back to it. And as you can see, I never left. The bug bit me and I was a rat, So I taught middle school science and math, high school science and math. I've been a middle school principal, high school principal, both in New Orleans, pre-Katrina, and in Chicago. And so at this moment in time, I am the executive director of Transformations Advisory Group, which is an education consulting firm, really just about bettering schools and school districts on behalf of all students, particularly those students of color. And so that's the quick way. I guess that's the last 20 plus years in a quick nutshell.
That makes you two perfect for this conversation. So when I read a lot of dissertations, right? But while I was reading your dissertation, Tre, and I got it kind of like at the last minute. I don't know if you had to change committee member. I don't know what happened. But Harrington asked me if I could do that. And when I got it, I couldn't put it down because I'm reading about this person who you followed and talked to students, you talked to parents, you talked to admin, you talked to the person themselves, not knowing, of course, that it was Toi that you were mentioning. Man. But one of the things that struck me it was the flow. Like we talked about it a little bit when we talked before, but the difference between needing to depend on discipline to manage kids and having a disciplined classroom where people know what the expectation is, but they know you care. So yeah, if you got to stop to attend to a particular child, you can do that. If you need to say, okay, you guys do these first three problems, I'll be with you. And you can do that. And you know what the outcome is going to be because you've created this disciplined, caring space. So I want you to tell me, Dr. Tre, what you saw. And then Toi, I want you to be thinking like, what were the steps? Like, how did you create that atmosphere? Because it's a thing of beauty when you see it, right? Like you don't see it all the time. And when you do, it's magical.
I think the question you asked me is a whole lot easier than the answer or the question that you asked Toi, which is, what did you see? And the research actually began as a former math and science teacher, I wanted to study high quality math instruction for Black and brown students. That's what I spent my life doing. And I wanted to see who else was doing amazing things, right? And so through the USI network back then, it actually turned into like, hey, they're actually, hey, there's this wonderful charter school, NKO, part of the University of Chicago network. And hey, they got this really amazing math teacher. You need to go see what's up. And I'm like, okay, what's the data? How great is it? Because I'm just like, well, what is great? Are we talking about management? Like, what are we talking about? Like, no, those test scores are running through the roof. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay, let me see these numbers, and then let me go see what's happening. And so obviously I jump through all the hoops to get into the classroom, which were several. And here's what I actually saw, and I'll put them in a few different buckets, and for just kind of summary view, and then Toi can be like, hey, this is how I did it. I think the first thing that I really understood was that there was a very competent teacher in front of the students that she was serving, right? And I knew that because there was no textbook in her hand, the teacher's edition. That was not in her hand. Like,
awesome.
I'm just gonna follow along as we, and then turn to this page and do no. There was clearly a very sophisticated knowledge about on the days that I was able to observe a start and end point, and I understand all of the micro pieces of what I wanted my students to know and be able to do in between, right? So she knew the content in and out, and through the interviews, I really understood the work that got her there, which I'm sure she could speak about, but she was completely competent in the field of mathematics. So that was kind of number one. Number two is I really enjoyed watching her ability to be able to pivot on a dime in terms of pedagogically what the experiences students were going through in order to reach proficiency on the standard for that particular day. And so she had a plan, right? Okay, got a plan, and the majority of students were vibing with her. Okay, we're in it, we're doing it, we're following the routines and the procedures, we got it. But when the students didn't understand, her checks for understandings were frequent, they were often. And additionally, she was like, okay, y'all are kind of glossing over a little bit. Let's pivot to a whole other thing. What I'm doing, what I initially planned, isn't hitting the way I really wanted to, but I got some stuff in the arsenal for you. So, and I'm ready to roll with it. And so it's not just saying the same thing. So I think oftentimes as a educator, when you think about reteaching, bad educators would reteach in the following ways. They would say the same thing that they said before, louder, and then say it slower.
Give you a different worksheet. Do the back of the worksheet.
I said carry the fat, but no, that's not, no, ma'am. No, sir, that's not how we're rolling. Like, there's actually a whole other experience that could be pivoted on a dime or on the next day, depending on the standard and where students were and their level of understanding towards, progress towards proficiency. And so she had that. She clearly understood the content, understood the pedagogy. But I think the thing that was really the most stellar and why I kind of left it at last is her relationships with the students. And the relationships with her students are key, they're paramount, right? And there's kind of two types of relationships that I want to kind of unpack. One is her relationships with the students, right? Her students would come in, she'd greet them at the door, she had it just felt like, man, they were old friends, old friends with purpose, right? Kind of like when you go to your grandmother's house, like, there are rules inside the house, but you're really happy that she's there and you're happy to be there, kind of thing, right? It's like, no, I can't wild out, but I'm so excited to be in this space where I feel valued and seen. And so I think that's very, very important, both from how you start the class, as well as like their ability or desire to even step up and participate in the lesson, share misconceptions, be risk takers. You know, mathematics is a risk taking kind of proposition, right? I don't know if I got the right answer. You asked me to do the thing, I've done the thing. I don't know if I had the right answer, but you know what? I'm willing to jump out here in front of my peers and rock with that and see how it's going. And even if I got the wrong answer, that's actually cool too. That's celebrated, it's affirmed, and then we start to think through what the misconceptions are. So that was all a part of I think the culture. I think the other part of the culture is the peer-to-peer relationships that I think were also very, very important, right? I'm not willing to really honestly take those risks in spaces where I don't feel safe with my peers. So I might vibe with you, I might rock with you. However, if I don't, you know, if I'm going to get clowned for having a wrong answer, why are you so stupid? Oh, you're so, you da 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 da. Why take that risk? I won't take that risk. But no, that's actually wasn't the case. Students were so excited to share their thinking as a means to progress towards proficiency, but that was all about this relational trust, both with each other as well as the teacher. All the routines and procedures were established, but there was this thing about like, you're going to take care of me in this process. And so I'm good, we're good, let's go. And that just appeared over and over again. And so those are some of the things that I unpacked in the research. And I was just incredibly blessed to be a part of that.
And Toi, so I remember you as a first year teacher, even though I was a first year principal. So we were all running around all over the place. But I know my first year in the classroom, I think, well, you know, everybody struggles with their first year. But I think that the fact that students knew I really cared about them, like I could get away with so many other things. The thing that struck me about what Dr. Tre just talked about is that idea of creating this psychologically safe space. So safe in terms of, I know what the routines are going to be in Miss Smith's room. Safe in terms of, I know we don't clown each other when an answer is not correct. I know she's going to help me figure this out before I leave this room, even if she has to pivot. How did you learn those things? Like, how did you learn those things? That's not a professional development, even though they might send you to professional development. That's not where you learn that. Like, how did that come about in your arsenal of teaching tools?
Yeah, that's really, thank you, first of all, Dr. Childress. I'm like, who is he talking about?
Talk about you, baby.
Yeah, so first of all, I have like this motto, and I'm like, you definitely treat people like you want to be treated. So that's first and foremost to me. And then I recognize students as people. You know, they are people, right? And they have a voice and they matter. There's a quote that's one of my favorite quotes by Cornel West says, you can't lead the people if you don't love the people. And you can't save the people if you don't serve the people, right? And so for me, it was just all about, as Tre said, just creating this atmosphere where students knew that I cared about them. Me being vulnerable in front of students was super important. Them seeing me as a learner was super important. Even though I felt like my content knowledge was strong, I was still there to learn something. There was something that those students could actually teach me. So a lot of my development came from students themselves, their anxieties around mathematics, their fears around mathematics, you know, and me just trying to figure out like how I could best like support them and get them over that hurdle that they were experiencing. Another thing was just I immersed myself in a lot of professional development. Again, I wasn't afraid to learn. Like, we don't know what we don't know. So it was important for me to engage in a lot of professional development. And even thinking about just like, so I taught 5th grade for several years. it wasn't like I was accustomed to the curriculum. It was always something new that I was learning, right? Even though I might have taught fractions, but these were new students that were coming into me. And how was I going to develop this particular set of students? So again, just this immersion in professional development, kids teaching me, just listening and approaching mathematics in a collaborative way, where students were able to discuss. I listened to students listened to me. So those things were just super, super important to me. And yeah, I was there to serve them, and I did care about them and they knew it. And I feel like that's super, super important. And again, just making sure that you create environments where students can trust you. I remember one year, a kid, I was teaching division, and I don't know how excited I had gotten about division. And one kid told me that I should be a math pastor. And I was like, wait, wait, but no. But student voice was so important. I remember one year I used to have on the board something like the funniest things kids would say about math, right? So I would document things that they would say in the classroom. But I just always tried to create that environment where students, that was safe. Kids were not afraid to take risks. In mathematics, we always think kids are always taught that there's a correct answer. There's a right and a wrong answer, right? But there are always inventive strategies to do mathematics, right? So just being open to students and their inventive strategies, and looking at this in multiple ways, that was super important to me. So yeah. Yeah,
it's amazing when you see it happen over time. I think people just being open to learning new things is one thing.
Yeah.
So I want to shift a little bit to a conversation with you two about urban schools just in general. So the reason why I started Urban Legends, the podcast and the website and everything, is because you say urban schools and typically people get this idea about what that is, or that it's difficult. So that makes it really hard to find teachers. And it's like now we're just using anybody to sub because we can't find teachers. But then when you find a school where people feel enabled and validated and whole, like people aren't as likely to leave. So I just want to, like, from your perspective, Toi, and from your perspective, Dr. Childress, like, what are some of the moves that leaders can take so that people start to feel like they're making a difference, like they actually are? So like the first time something difficult happens, I'm not running to the suburbs. I'm actually staying because I know the kids here need me. Like what do we need to do differently to change the narrative about what happens in our schools?
Toi, do you mind if I just go?
No, absolutely.
So I get the opportunity to serve a number of different types of schools and school districts from around our state as well as around the country, and I've seen just different types of schools, different ethos, different missions, different everything, right? Charter, public, parochial, just the whole kind of gambit. And I think that there is kind of a recipe for really high functioning schools, and leaders. And I think it really honestly begins with and I'm going to say something really unpopular, which is, I think it really starts with the EQ of the leader. So I think that the connections, I think we even began with this, is the leader of the building that Toi was in when I was able to do the research. Her EQ was at 1,000%. When most people are at like 50, she's at 1,000, right? Yeah. So the connections and people mattering and seeing people for the value of who their humanity is as a means to beginning the opportunity to teach them. That's the starting point. Like that's huge, right? And setting culture in that way. and the connectivity of that kind of web between students and teachers with other teachers, teachers with parents and families as a kind of a whole community. Man, it was actually a really, really beautiful thing to see. And so I think that Toi's talents were able to flourish in a space that was cultivated to actually build connections and not just test scores. Of course, everybody's responsible for some test scores, right? Everybody's data needs to be where it needs to be, and we're being called to that, and I think legitimately. However, like, if you're going after data without actually delivering on the promise of cultivating the capacity of the people, then you're missing the boat. You're just trying to get numbers without actually investing in the social, emotional wellness of the people they're serving as a means to cultivate the academic promise and of everyone involved, right? And so I think that those are the things that I saw in my both in my research and as well as in my journey as both a profession, a principal as well as a consultant, is that actually people really actually mattered, right? And so I think what we're seeing in the midst of this pandemic is that wellness is a thing. It's a real thing, and everybody isn't well when you see them. They're not just a cog in the wheel. If you really want to get the most out of people, you actually have to see them as humans, understand their stories. You started off with asking us, who are we? How do we come into this work? What matters to us? That really has to be at the forefront. And what do they want to get out of this process? And then be able to be caretakers of all of those entities along the way, right? For a year or several years. The point really is like, I see you, I acknowledge you, I want to know you, I want to commune with you and build your capacity and to mean this vulnerable space. So for learning, I think one of the things that I neglected to mention in my introduction that Toi referenced is, I remember her saying, yeah, when I was a student, I was struggling with. I remember her saying that, right? So as a means to disarm students who may be like, oh, this new crazy division is nuts and I don't know what to do with that. Gave license to vulnerability and authenticity. And I think if people aren't free to be their best selves,
can't really do anything.
No,
you can't do anything, even in a personal relationship where you don't feel free to be vulnerable or make a mistake. Like, being on edge all the time is not the way. Like, it's not the way. Like, you can't grow that way. And I've seen classrooms like that where, especially in terms of math, trying to memorize an algorithm or how you do something like bring down, carry, like that is like, doesn't work anymore. Students cannot just memorize it. They got to understand why. And once they understand why, like Toi said, they come up with different strategies I never even imagined. But yeah, it's so, okay. So Toi, what do you think?
I also feel like leaders have to, I feel like leaders are like the instructional coaches in the building. So that's super important. I feel like leaders have to be able to trust their teachers. And I feel like, I don't know if that is necessarily, we are seeing that anymore, but I feel like, and they have to be a visionary. They have to be able to point us in the direction that they want, us to go. So I feel like vision is important. And as Tre said, building people, I just remember, we engaged in activities outside of school. So it wasn't always about content and curriculum and professional development, but just building those relationships. outside of the school. And that happened with you as a principal too. We had a lot of professional development days and stress days. So those things, you want to make sure you're building the culture of the teachers, right? Building them up. And so I feel like that is super important. I remember at NKO, my principal was in my classroom every morning, even if it was just to say hello, you know, not to check up on me, not to micromanage me, but just to say hello, give me a hug. How are you? You know, how are things going? Do you need anything? So just being present and letting us know and letting the teachers know, hey, like I'm here to support you if you need it. And so I feel like those are super, super important things that's needed in urban education.
That's outstanding. Outstanding. Okay,
yeah.
so I always end with a quote and get your response to this quote. So hopefully you're ready for it. So here's the quote. It's W.B. Du Bois, who I think is like, I started reading his works and I just can't believe that, like, I didn't have access to that when I was in high school, but anyway. So a system cannot fail those who it was never meant to protect. And in terms of urban schools, I don't think that our schools or the way that our schools have been funded, developed, staffed, I don't think that our schools were meant to protect us. So it's going to be on us to follow up and do our own protecting. That's what it feels like to me. So just tell me what you think about that and take us home. What do you think?
I agree. And I feel like it's up to us to change the narrative, you know, and it might not happen like school-wide, but I'm like, impact the area that you're in, right? And so, yeah, change the narrative, do something different, learn something different. So when I read that quote, I was like, oh, that's kind of deep, but like, what do? We have to change the trajectory of what this looks like, and make ourselves available in these classrooms. And, you know, we do things one step at a time. I'm like, and it doesn't have to be a lofty goal. Like you might not say, you know what, I want to change everything, but just focus on one thing, one specific thing that you want to change, you know, and build on that. And so, yeah, I feel like that we're in charge. You know, if we're in the classrooms and we're the voices that these students are hearing, then we have to be the ones that are going to change this narrative. Yeah, so
awesome.
Dr. Tre? I actually completely agree with Toi.
Yes.
1,000%. I guess my only spin is actually just to tell a little bit of a narrative. When I began teaching in Teach for America, I was back in '99. I taught in New Orleans. This is pre-Katrina, just by a few years. And an interesting thing about New Orleans is, if you've ever been there, it's a great place to have a great time. However, 80% of the Black population was at or below the poverty level. Yeah. So if I had a parent conference, they had to call off work or were going to be late to work in order to even show up. And they usually were in, forgive the expression, just the domestic uniform, right? Mm-hmm. It was a work uniform. It was a uniform of someone who is going to be of service. This is a service industry. And I think in many ways, the education system at that point in time was meant to consistently perpetuate it. We weren't making college graduates by and large, because the families that were interested in college graduates actually went to either magnet schools or parochial schools, right? Which is really huge in New Orleans, right? So you had to pay for the education. If you wanted a really amazing education at that moment in time, you really needed to go to a private school or go to a selective enrollment magnet school, right? And I was not teaching one of those, right? And so I'm like, wow. And you see what, we were getting a pack of paper for the whole year, and we had to go buy more paper for ourselves. I mean, it's underfunded. We can go, down that particular road. And And so that was my starting point. And then to just kind of compare that to what I was exposed to as a learner, both through my parents as learners, as well as myself, I began to really quickly realize is that, listen, the truth is that W.E.B. Du Bois' statement is absolutely correct. A member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, is shout out to the bros, is actually really interesting because is the system itself interested in the progress of the people it's meant to serve? The answer, obviously, in this particular system is no. Where did historically Black schools come from? They came from a need for, we have to educate a group of people, both at the elementary, middle, high, college, you know, so on and so forth. We have to do it. But because of segregation, we had to do it for ourselves, right? There was actually only Black people educating Black people, and they established, you know, what Dr. Teresa Perry calls a counter narrative, right? It's like, hey, this system has been created in the following ways. We're going to teach you that system, but we're also going to circumvent that system by making you the best and the brightest in everything that you do, and we will only accept that. And that's what they created. They created the best minds that this world has ever seen by just being a counter. They were being adversarial to the system. They weren't just teaching agriculture. They were actually teaching chemistry. They're teaching everything on the planet because they knew our people required it. And so if you think about the people that rose up during that time, and that are in our families, and in the Great Migration that, you know, moved all into urban areas, and they all took those lessons from the South with Black teachers who were overqualified to teach in those schools. So you had PhDs teaching in elementary and middle and high school. It's just like, why? Because they couldn't get jobs at other spaces. Yes. They were overqualified. And so I think that if we are able to actually hold on to the narrative that we can and we are the best and the brightest, and we can continue to perpetuate that regardless of the level, then our students are going to benefit because they're going to speak life into them. They're going to speak their history into them. They're going to say, I see you. I see your identity. I see you as a person, and you can do more. You can be better. You don't even know what you can do, but I do. And we're going to do it. We're going to do it all together. It is an old school reference. I saw it very recently in a wonderful classroom, a 5th grade classroom on the south side of Chicago, that met all of the criteria of you are the best, you are the brightest, and I'm going to relentlessly pursue you into greatness. Those students right now are in college.
That's amazing.
They are in college right now.
Yes, they are.
That's because of the beauty of what has been passed on by, you know, the ancestors and those who came up from slavery.
That's amazing. So obviously we're going to have a part 2 to our conversation, because we need to talk a little bit more about our math phobia and math instruction. We need to talk about that idea of changing and recreating our own narrative, and just like steps to take to do that. That, I mean, obviously is the answer. I just really want to thank you two so very much for being with me this evening and sharing all that wisdom. And Toi, I can't even, like, with your evolution as a teacher, like I met you at the beginning, and now I'm here with you as a consultant. I'm so excited. Well, thank you.
It's because I had great leaders like you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.